I was inspired by the muralist Diego Rivera and his contributions to the Hispanic culture through his work. Born to a wealthy Mexican family on December 8, 1886, and well educated, Rivera used his privilege and talent to express political and socially relevant issues and events through the extension of his vibrant and larger than life murals. The publicly displayed creations, located in Detroit, Michigan, offer a perspective into daily life and the historically significant intricacies that blend our multicultural society. His murals in Detroit emphasize the cross culture interweaving and its progression in society. In 1932, Rivera was commissioned by auto industry heir Edsel Ford and Detroit Institute of Art director Dr. William Valentier to create original frescoes on two walls of the garden court at the Detroit Institute of Art. The only criteria imposed on Diego Rivera was that the murals must reflect the progression of industry in the city of Detroit. After Diego Rivera and his wife Frida Kahlo arrived in Detroit, they toured the Ford plants, areas in the city that showcased advances of medical technology, chemical technology, and viewing the vast shipping industry. Rivera was so impressed by the massive Ford factories and the city that he agreed to paint 27 panels total on all four walls to showcase the city of Detroit and its progression in the automobile industry. Each of the 27 panels is painted by a technique of building up wet plaster. Rivera only had his assistants prepare enough plaster for him to complete for the day. These frescoes are usually referred to in the cardinal direction of east, west, north, and south walls. Diego Rivera was not well received by all of the community members of Detroit. However, both Edsel Ford and William Valentier both stood by Rivera and his work. To better understand the tension amongst the public, it's important to recall the country was in the midst of the Great Depression, and some questioned why a Mexican artist had been chosen over an American painter. This historical event outlines the racism that was held towards Mexicans at this time. During the Great Depression, America was desperately unemployed, and it was controversial for the Detroit Institute of Art to support a non American for a very expensive project. It was purposeful for both Ford and Valentier to have Diego Rivera commissioned due to his methodical interpretations of nature and the ever industrialization of America. Both Rivera transposing his Hispanic culture onto Detroit, he offered a unique perspective of the meaning of life and daily interactions between humans and Mother Nature and the balance of coexisting during industrialization. Detroit Industry Murals tells a story of precaution and the dangers of progression by following the mural's walls in order of east, north, south, and west. The story of progression begins at the east wall. The sunrise illuminates the murals and symbolizes the beginning of not only each day, but the symbol of light being life. Upon first glance, our eyes meet their first introduction to Mother Nature. Rivera pays homage to Mother Nature and her gifts by painting two voluptuous, partially nude women, each painted in Rivera's style of round, full breasts and curved feminine features that can be seen in other works. These beautiful and statuesque women are watching over the garden court from their own panel. Cradled in their arms and resting in their laps are abundant gifts from Mother Nature, one holding long grains of golden wheat to match her North American blonde hair, the other an abundance of succulent ripe apples are being held by a Mexican female. Below each of the stoic women is a vibrant panel filled with gourds. Gourds are very commonly depicted amongst Mexican art as they symbolize the fruitfulness of life. Through these panels, Rivera communicates the idea that all human endeavor is rooted in the earth and the relationship between man and the gifts that Mother Nature gives us. This theme is very important to Mexican culture as many rural Mexicans rely heavily on agriculture. By Rivera bringing that theme to the United States, he is asking American society to question their respect for nature. In the center of the east wall, the final element that binds the seven panels together is Rivera's symbol and hope of the future. The women are connected to an infant, safely tucked into its cocoon under the earth and protected by Mother Nature herself. The infant is growing and nurtured until the next harvest and remains safely guarded. The roots are deeply grounded into the earth, perhaps as a symbol of faith or religion and a reminder that life is a gift. Rivera uses the east wall in his work of the Detroit Industry Murals to represent the society that foundations of life. His work calls upon the viewer to reflect on their birth and the relationship with nature. The story then continues onto the north wall, where Rivera has detailed for us the unlikely cultural diversity of the workforce for the time era, clearly depicting racially inclusive laborers collectively pulling with great force to move the large objects before them. This depiction is a metaphor that when we work together, we can overcome racial and cultural barriers. In Mexican culture, typically a man's machismo or masculinity is very important to them, and men displaying their strength and virility is a reflection of that machismo. The room is filled with a glowing orange light from the enormous furnace that fuels the assembly line, and it illuminates the mass amounts of men working in multiple areas of the Ford plants. In both American and Mexican culture, during Diego Rivera's time, men were the income providers for their families. In the foreground of this wall, a black man and a white man are depicted pulling a heavy metal cart along a track in the factory. Their forearm muscles are clenched as a representation for grit and honor that all men had to possess at the time despite their race. The blue of the workers' denim overalls represents the sadness which complements the muted yellow of some workers' shirts, representing optimism. The balance between sadness and optimism is a reflection of machismo culture. Due to the underprivileged and poor living conditions during the Great Depression, death and sickness were also at an all-time high. Hispanic American men had to overcome a great sadness that the Great Depression laid upon society by maintaining an optimistic outlook. Diego Rivera uses the North Wall in his works of the Detroit Industry Murals to validate the dark feelings and saddening experiences that all men during the Great Depression suffered. The story flows to the south wall, where assembly workers are crowded into a two-story assembly line. Ford was known at this time to develop the method of factory work. Using an assembly line, workers only needed to be trained on a small task that is part of a collective whole. The workers, elbow to elbow, each dressed in hues of blue and yellow and have different skin tones and represent the ethnically diverse workforce that contributed to the automobile industry. They work together as the stern white foreman watches, each contributing their essential part to the buildings of Ford's automobiles. Whites and Hispanics work together under Ford. Rivera wanted to present to society the forward thinking of Ford and to project the possibility of racial inclusion into the workplace as a positive idea. In the background, beyond the assembly room, we see a crowd of people looking in on the laborers. This is where Rivera's depiction of the effects of supply and demand, the deep balance between greed and meeting one's needs. The large stamping machine that is located on the right side of the wall is a symbol from Mexican folklore, Codalicu. The god of creation and war was believed to be appeased through human sacrifice. Rivera was purposeful for his inclusion of this mythological character, as it gives honors to the individuals who worked in the Ford's factories. Many assembly line workers were underpaid and worked in inhumane conditions. The Codalicu demonstrates the self-sacrifice that assembly line workers gave for their families. The southern wall of the Detroit Industry Murals represents the human-to-human progression that Ford was implementing at the time. Rivera alludes to racial inequality and all while tying in important Hispanic mythology. The final west wall is the precautionary tale of the dangers of industrial progression. The 8 panels receive the darkening light of the sunset within Rivera Court and prepare the room for the end of his story. 4 of the panels depict the possibility of war and chemical warfare. The airplanes and bombers are prepared for battle. The soldiers dressed in gas masks anticipate the toxic poisons and destruction that war brings. Under the warplanes are two birds flying towards one another, a dove and hawk. One a symbol of peace and hope from the Christian Bible, the other a symbol of Hispanic symbol of war and bad luck. The horizontal panel between the two birds is a poignant depiction in subtle tones of creams and euchre. It is the river. This river is a physical boundary between nature and the industrialization of our earth. Rivera depicts North American indigenous people reaping the harvest and the Western world of shipping ports and industrialized factories. Rivera keeps the tribal affiliation of these indigenous people vague, honoring the people who first inhabited our lands. The entire right side of the Western Wall represents peace and brotherhood as demonstrated by the blue stained glass window under the dove. The left side of the Western Wall reflects hatred as a red stained glass window accompany the warhawk. In Diego Rivera's Western Wall, in his works of the Detroit Industry Murals, he concludes his epic story by presenting differing societal projects and asking the observer to take the path of positivity. The murals that Diego Rivera created for the Detroit Institute of Art echo the beautiful tones of not only the skin color of the laborers, but the necessity of seeing past the differences for the sake of progression. The Detroit Industry Murals have an infusion of Hispanic culture mixed with elements from Mother Nature that remind us that regardless of progression, respecting Mother Earth and her abundant gifts should always be paramount.